If you have a structured layout you need to iterate on by swapping out text and images to create unique versions, then you need InDesign's data merge. And by the time we're done with this video, you'll know everything there is to know about it. Let's go. Before we jump into the project, let's get on the same page about what exactly data merge is. If you've ever used mail merge in Microsoft Word, it's that, but with text and images and QR codes and better typography and layout, everything InDesign excels at. The process starts with an InDesign layout. You then link that to a data source like a spreadsheet, create placeholders for the data in the layout, then output unique variations using the data from the spreadsheet. Let's look at a real-life example. This is a half-page flyer for one ride in a series of group bike rides that my cycling club is promoting. I need a unique flyer for each ride that uses the same layout with different information. What changes is the information highlighted here: the day of the week, month, date, time, starting point, destination, description, number of miles, map, and the QR code. I want to end up with what's in this file. As I go through each page, here's the next ride, the next, and so on. In each, the variable information changes, but the layout stays the same. You may have noticed that even the illustration at the top changes. That's because it's not one illustration. Each of the cyclists is a separately placed image, and they're swapped out by data merge to give each version an even more unique look. Right now, though, nothing in this original file with the single flyer is set up to make this work. I have to prepare this file for data merge by connecting it to a data source. In my case, that's this Microsoft Excel file, but you can use any spreadsheet tool. In this spreadsheet, I've got columns with the unique values for all the text and images that will change in each version of the flyer. All the data InDesign needs is in here, but it's not quite ready yet. A few structural things have to change to properly connect this data to my layout. What InDesign is most picky about is QR codes and images. So let's start with the QR codes. For each QR code, I have a URL, but that's not enough. InDesign can generate QR codes for not only hyperlinks, but also plain text, text messages, email messages, and business card data. So when you're using data merge to create a QR code, you have to let InDesign know what kind of QR code it's making. In this case, they're hyperlinks, so InDesign needs URL : at the start of each. I'll add that using Excel's find change to look for every instance of HTTPS and replace them with URL : HTTPS by clicking Replace All. Now the URLs are formatted the way InDesign wants them, but the header for the column also needs to change, so InDesign recognizes that a QR code should be generated. That column header has to be #QR codes, plural, with no spaces. Next comes the images. All of these are Illustrator file names for the different cyclist images in that illustration at the top of each flyer. On my computer, those files are in a folder called Cyclist Graphics, so they're one level removed from the InDesign file that drives this data merge process. I have to point InDesign to the contents of that folder using a relative path, which means the location of the image files relative to that InDesign file. If all the supporting graphics were loose in the same folder as my InDesign file, I wouldn't have to do that. But for organization's sake, I prefer to keep the graphics in a separate folder. The images could technically be anywhere on my computer, but if they're not in the same folder as my InDesign file, I'd have to use an absolute path to point to them, meaning going from the root directory of my hard drive through every subfolder to get to the one with my images. That's cumbersome and takes longer. I generally keep my images in subfolders within the same folder as my InDesign file. A relative path is just the folder name and a / before each file name. For that, I'll use find change again. All my cyclist graphics start with cyclist _, so I'll put that in the find field and replace it with cyclist graphics, all uppercase because these references are case sensitive, then a / and cyclist _. And there you go, 45 replacements easily made. The last image column is for the ride maps, which are in a folder called Ride Maps that's also adjacent to my InDesign file. I'll select all those image references, and since they all start with 0, I'll search for 0 and replace it with Ride Maps / 0. Under Options, I've limited the search to columns so I don't affect any zeros in my dates or other cells in the spreadsheet. Then I'll click Replace All, and it makes 9 replacements. Now my file names and paths are all established exactly the way InDesign wants them, and the last thing I need to do is change the header for any column that refers to images, similar to how I had to put the hashtag before QR codes. I can name the column anything I want, but I have to type the @ symbol at the beginning. However, in Excel, watch what happens when I try to hit Enter to save that change. I get a dialog that it's not a valid function because the @ symbol has a different meaning in Excel. To get past this, I'll type in a single apostrophe before the @ symbol, which Excel accepts. I have to add that to each column header, which I can quickly do up in the formula bar. Once I do that for all the cyclist image columns and the ride map column, everything is ready for InDesign, except for the Excel file itself. However you create the spreadsheet, it has to be saved as either a comma-delimited CSV file or a tab-delimited TXT file. I find CSV the most reliable, so that's what I typically use. I'll go to File, Save As to save this as a CSV and name it 2025 Ride Source Data Prepped.csv. Now let's go back to InDesign and connect my data to my layout. I already have the Data Merge panel open, but if you're starting on your own, you'll find it under Window, Utilities, Data Merge. It opens by default as a floating panel, but I have mine docked over here to keep things neat and tidy. Before anything is set up, the panel lists the 3 steps necessary to do a data merge. Choose Select Data Source from the panel, drag data fields from the panel to frames on the page, and then choose Create Merge Document. Let's do that first step. From the panel menu, I'll choose Select Data Source, select my 2025 Ride Source Data Prepped CSV file, and click Open. The Data Merge panel populates with the column headers from my spreadsheet, each with an icon indicating whether it's text, a QR code, or an image. Now on to step 2, replacing what's in my layout with the placeholders from this panel, so the unique data can be swapped out in the merge process. I'll start from the top, which is the day of the week. I'll select this day, including the period, and click this DD column heading, and everything disappears. My text is completely gone. Why is that? The reason is that each placeholder is added with double angle brackets on either side of it. So DD will appear in this text frame as left angle bracket, DD, right angle bracket, right angle bracket. That's too much text to fit in the predefined size I have for my dates and times. There are a couple of ways that I can deal with this. I can open the story editor by hitting Command Y and get an unformatted view of the text in this frame, whether it's visible on the page or not. Here, you can see that placeholder where my original text was, and here's the abbreviation for June. I'll select that in the story editor and click the month value in the Data Merge panel, and that placeholder is dropped in. That's one way to do it, but I prefer to see everything in my layout. So instead of using the story editor, I'll hit Command B for my text frame options, go to the auto size options, choose width only and set it to expand from the center because my text is centered. I'll check no line breaks so my text won't wrap and click OK. Now I can see those day and month placeholders. The next placeholder I need to add is for the actual date, which is the 00 item in the Data Merge panel. I'll click that and it puts that placeholder in. We've only put in these 3 placeholders, but I want to quickly preview this before moving on. I'll check the preview box in the bottom of the Data Merge panel, and there's Saturday, June 7th, my first ride date. I'll click the forward arrow to preview the next record, and now it's Sunday, June 22nd, then Sunday, July 13th, and so on. I'll turn preview off for now, and let's put in our remaining text placeholders. I'll click into this frame with the time, select the start time, and replace that with start. Then select the end time and replace that with finish. That frame is already set to auto size, so it adapts perfectly. Next, I'll select this text after the word from that says Shakespeare Park and replace that with the origin placeholder. Short Beach/Lordship will be my turnaround placeholder, and the line below that will be details. Finally, I'll select the number 8 here and replace it with miles. This frame also has auto size applied to it to expand from the center out to fit this longer placeholder. That's it for my text. Now let's start adding placeholders for the graphics. I'll start with the QR code by clicking the graphic frame, then clicking QR codes in the Data Merge panel. The existing QR code is replaced by a placeholder and gets this dashed line around it indicating that it's a graphic linked to variable data. I'll do the same for the map. Select the frame, click Ride Map, and the original image is no longer visible, just my placeholder text. The last thing I'll do is select my cyclists, and I'll need some help from the Layers panel for that, because these graphic frames overlap a lot, which makes directly clicking on them a challenge. In the Layers panel, I'll open up my foreground, middle, and background layers to view their contents, then click the little square next to Cyclist Female 01 to select it, and click Foreground in the Data Merge panel. Now she's replaced with a placeholder. I'll click the little square next to Cyclist Male 01, that's this guy on the left, and swap him out for the placeholder Middle 1. Cyclist Senior 01 gets replaced with Middle 2, and in the background, I'll click Cyclist Kid 01, which gets replaced by Background 1, then Cyclist Mom 01 to replace it with Background 2. That's all the individual riders. The foliage and the sky behind them are a separate file that doesn't change. So I've successfully linked all the variable text and graphics in my layout to my data source. My layout looks nothing like it did before, but it will once I click Preview in the Data Merge panel. I'll also change my screen mode to preview by hitting the W key, which hides all the distracting stuff. Now this looks exactly like the layout that I started out with because it's using the corresponding data from the first record in my CSV file. But if I start clicking the forward arrow to preview the next record, now it's the June 22nd ride. Different text details, different map and QR code, and a different arrangement of cyclists. The same is true for the third one and the fourth one, all the way through to my ninth one. Everything is working and looking great, but I haven't yet created a merged document. For that, I can either go to the Create Merge Document icon next to my data source name in the Data Merge panel, or go to the panel menu and choose Create Merged Document. In this dialog, I can choose whether to output all records, meaning every row in my spreadsheet, just a single record, or split it up and do selective records in a range. I want all records. Each one will be on its own page, so records per document page is correctly set to single record. Don't worry, we'll get to multiple records soon enough. By default, InDesign will generate an overset text report letting me know if the text in my spreadsheet exceeds what my placeholder frames can fit, so I can go back in and check or fix that if it happens. I'll also get an alert if images that are referenced in my data source are missing. Since we're not doing a multiple record layout yet, the next thing I'll look at is Options. Here, you can choose how InDesign fits images that get placed during the merge. Your images may not all be the same aspect ratio or physical size, so you can have Data Merge place your images using any of these frame-fitting options. I've already defined how my images fit in this layout, and because that's how I typically work, I always choose Use Existing. If you are using one of the other fitting options, you can also opt to have the image centered in the frame when placed, and choose whether InDesign embeds the images in the merge document or keeps them linked. Remove blank lines for empty fields doesn't apply to this project, but to give you a sense of what it does, every year I use Data Merge to make Christmas card mailing labels from a spreadsheet of names and addresses. Some entries have a company name, but most don't. Some have an apartment or condo number, others don't. Remove blank lines for empty fields, make sure any missing data won't leave an awkward blank line in the final layout. Record limit per document is important if you have many records in your spreadsheet. While Data Merge has no specific limit on the number of records in a data source file, a massive data merge could bog down InDesign's performance or cause it to crash. If you have a lot of records to merge, you can break them up into batches by specifying how many records will be merged per document. If you have 500 records, putting in a 50-page limit will generate 10 separate documents. Also, since there's no specific option for outputting each record as a separate InDesign file, you can accomplish that by setting this value to 1. We're not using either setting here. I just wanted you to be aware of these options and what they do. So I'll click OK, and within seconds, my data merge is finished, and I get this alert dialog that no overset text was generated. Notice that the data merge panel has reset back to its default state. That's because this is my brand new merged document, not the one I used to set everything up. There are now 9 pages in here, each of which has its unique content in place, all in one document. But let's say, instead of an InDesign document, I wanted everything output to individual PDFs. For that, I have to go back to the source document, and instead of Create Merge Document, I'll choose Export to PDF. I get the exact same dialog with the same options, but when I click OK, I'm presented with the Export Adobe PDF dialog, and I can take advantage of all of the things I can do with a PDF, like add marks and bleeds. And I have the option to create separate PDF files right here. With that checked, I'll click OK, create a folder for those PDFs called Exported PDFs, and Data Merge does all the merging and creates 9 separate PDF files, one for each version. So we've seen how I get Data Merge to output a multi-page InDesign document, one InDesign document per record, a multi-page PDF, or one PDF per record. But what if I wanted to take advantage of a multiple record layout? For that, I'll go to a different file where I have a small square version of these ride promos where I've dropped the map because there isn't room for it, and instead of 5 cyclists in my illustration, I have 4. But it's connected to the exact same data source. Just because data exists for the map and the 5th cyclist in my CSV file, I'm not required to use it in my layout. If I want to gang up every version of this on a single page, I need room on the page to do it. In this case, I've created enough space on this document page to fit all 9. If I had more, InDesign would create as many additional pages as it needed. Here again, I'll choose Create Merge Document, but instead of single record, I'll choose multiple records. And I'll turn on Preview Multiple Record Layout to get a sense of how InDesign is going to handle this. And based on the current settings, this is what it does. It's not fitting them all. I need to fix that, so I'll go to Multiple Record Layout. The reason it's not fitting everything in is because it has this 1/2 inch margin all the way around it. If I set that margin to 0 on all sides, it eliminates all the margins, but still can't fit more than 4 because of the spacing between the columns and between the rows. I'll set each to 0, and there you go. All 9 of my variations are fitting right on this single page. One last option I can apply is whether I want them arranged first by row, which they currently are, or by columns. And if I click OK, I get a merged document with all 9 arranged on a single page. Okay, that was a lot. Let's recap. We covered setting up a data source file for InDesign with paths and the proper headings, how to connect that source file to the layout and add placeholders, how to auto-size frames when placeholder text is too big to be visible, how to create a single merged InDesign document or one document per record, how to merge directly to PDF, and how to set up a multiple record merge. That's everything you need to know about data merge in InDesign, and that's it for this episode. If you want to try this out for yourself, I've made all of these files available for download from the link in the description below. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to help me build its audience. If you have questions, please ask them in the comments and turn on notifications so you'll know when my new content comes out. Until then, this is Michael Murphy for The InDesigner. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.